Hey everyone, welcome to another episode 6 of Formidable Opponents. Today we are arguing about best male SNL cast member. I'm Randall, as always, alongside Canteen Boy Joseph and Brian Fellows, otherwise known as Bob. And this show has everything: lights, psychos, Furbies, screaming babies, and Mozart wigs, sunburned drifters with soap-sud beards. We're gonna have a good time today, guys. We're gonna talk about best SNL male cast member. So we'll jump right to it. We're going to go ahead and start off with some of our honorable mentions. We know last week we talked a lot about actually the best female SNL cast member. So this is the second part of a two-part series, and we're going to concentrate strictly on the male cast members. Bob, Joseph, how are you guys doing, man?
Doing great. A little heartbroken because of the NCAA tournament, because my team got knocked out last night in the final seconds, but
mine just got knocked out right now.
Other than that, doing great,
man. It's been horrible, man. Joseph, you got a little bit to say?
No, mine just got out right, like maybe 30 minutes before we started this show. But it's all, everybody's bracket is shit, and that's all I'm going to say. Anyway,
I'm talking. I don't know if you've seen Loyola. They got a guy who's like 270 pounds that's leading the team. He doesn't look like a basketball player, but I mean they're kicking ass.
He looks like he's a construction worker, but like a YMCA construction.
Good
worker.
For them. I hope they win it all at this point. I don't care anymore.
It's all out the window at this point. So to give you guys a little history, we're talking about best SNL male cast member. Some interesting facts I wanted to share with everybody before we got started. Lorne Michaels said everybody's favorite cast is the cast they saw when they're in high school. I don't think that's very true to what we chose today. And just to give you guys a little bit background about SNL, that's what's great about doing a two-part series. Sometimes when you don't say things during the first episode, you get to catch up on the second episode. Saturday Night Live's existence is partially due to Johnny Carson's desire for more vacation days. They used to have a best of Johnny Carson in the week on Saturday nights, went ahead and changed it to Saturday Night Live, and it's been all just success after that. And so we know that primarily, we talked a little bit about how last week, the first 3 decades really focused on the male talent, and the females have really been the focus over the past 2 decades. But in talking about some of the male honorable mentions, what are some of your guys' honorable mentions? Who did you guys grow up watching, listening, loving, making you laugh?
There's a couple that come to mind, and 2 in particular that I feel that are so underrated. First, Fred Armisen. I think he's probably one of the most underrated
very, very
SNL cast members ever been. I mean, facial expressions, impressions, characters, craziness. I am your mother. I love that one where he dresses up as a woman.
I just saw that one.
I mean, he's obviously the funniest one in the Californians. Have you ever seen that one? Everybody's in a blonde wig and
I love that. I love that one.
And my second honorable mention that I always found to be crazy funny was Phil Hartman. Phil Hartman, he just had a different type of humor, a different type of delivery. He had a different voice. He had a different look. He looked like the uncle, right? And everybody else in the group looked like, the young, hip, fun person. And he looked like the uncle that's there just hanging out with his nephews, right? He had a great look. He had a great sense of humor. I loved his Sinatra and the caveman lawyer, and then him playing Bill Clinton eating French fries after a run. He was just great. I think those 2 guys deserve to be honorable mentions today.
I really liked Andy Samberg. I know that's something more new, but I think it's more because 1, I find him funny. 2, he did a lot of he did writing, and he all those SNL digital skits that people love to this day, and they don't do them anymore, were written by him and his writing group. What are they called? The Lonely Island Boys. I think he was really underrated. But another one, and this other person that I almost went with was Chris Kattan. I think Chris Kattan, Bob, was Fred Armisen before Fred Armisen. The reason I didn't go with him is because, I mean, we all know Chris Kattan, and you can't. It didn't.
Mongo.
You can't say the success of his SNL career transition into films. I mean, unless you're a big fan of Night at the Roxbury or something. Or Chris Kattan was doing a lot of funny stuff. He made a lot of sketches. He had a lot of characters, and they were all very memorable, very funny. But it's basically there's a reason why I didn't pick him. Although I thought he was great, his like you said, Mongo, his Antonio Banderas, but I must, but it just, so that those two really stood out in my mind.
I think a few of mine, I had a whole list here, and there are a lot of people of interest that I want to dive into before we get to our selection. Just to be completely transparent, I was going to go with Dana Carvey. I had sort of espoused myself with that selection. I switched my selection midweek, but Dana Carvey, for those of you who don't know, carried the show for so many years. So funny as Johnny Carson. George Bush, just hilarious. He didn't have the movie career I thought he would. I bought a lot of Dana Carvey stock when he was skyrocketing at SNL. Yeah, he had some bad movies after. I think there was one called Opportunity Knocks, which was a terrible movie. He did The Master of Disguise, which was another bad movie. Essentially, the only thing that's connected him to success is Saturday Night Live. Being Garth on Wayne's World. So I was a little disappointed that much in the same sort of conversation that we talked about Sherry O'Terry last week. Dana Carvey, I thought he'd have a much bigger career. You guys know another one, Chris Farley is somebody we have to talk about. Indeed. I mean, that guy, pound for pound was the funniest, just hysterical. I mean, it's almost tragic to talk about him.
Yeah, he was actually my second choice. I love seeing Chris Farley, everything he did, all his crazy antics and everything. And he was fucking brilliant and hilarious throughout his time on SNL.
Chris Farley, I'll give you guys an example. Do you guys remember that skit? Actually, this involves Chris Farley. Dana Carvey was in this skit too, where Adam Sandler was playing a pepper boy. And he was like, Dana Carvey was like a pepper tutor. Like he was
the fresh the pepper.
Yeah. Fresh. Yeah. And Adam Sandler could
fresh pepper.
Yeah. So Chris Farley had a much bigger role in that skit, and they cut out his role and they wanted him to say, "Yes, sir, I would like more pepper." But he went in and he put like the most obnoxious beard on, and you got to watch, just Google Pepper Boy skit, and Chris Farley just breaks Adam Sandler, and you could tell Dana Carvey is like, "Hey, don't break. Try to stick with it." But Chris Farley just had that power. He was just incredibly talented, incredibly sweet. Used to just do some crazy things.
I always think of Chippendales, the Chippendales skit.
Yes, with Patrick Swayze.
Or that Folgers crystal. Do you realize, sir, you're drinking decaf crystals? And he gets all pissed off.
Flip over tables and go, "Hey, shit.
You no good son of a bitch."
Adam Sandler's another one we talk about a lot. Somebody that we enjoyed watching. He did some pretty good. He had some great skit characters, especially on Weekend News Update when he did Opera Man and Cajun Man and the guitar solos he would do. Those were all good. You mentioned Phil Hartman, Bob. Mike Myers was another guy that I enjoyed watching too. I thought he was a great character. I have him up there too. One guy I wanted to mention, we talked about NCAA tournament over a little bit earlier. Chevy Chase. Chevy Chase was on SNL for 1 year. He was their first big breakout star. I couldn't put Chevy Chase in my top 5. I don't think I even have him in my top 10, even though that first year he was amazing. I always thought of Saturday Night Live like the NCAA. And when you went on to your movie career, that was like your NBA. And I kind of compare Chevy Chase to like Carmelo Anthony. Carmelo Anthony only played one season at Syracuse, won a championship. But when you talk about Carmelo Anthony being one of the best college basketball players, I don't think he's really in the mix. I don't think you have enough of him. You only have him for one season. People talk about Christian Laettner or Grant Hill or some of these other players, Tim Duncan, who were 4-year, 3-year starters in the NCAA. But you won't talk about Chevy Chase, even though his movie career I thought was pretty good in the 80s. He had some classic movies that we still watch. But he's very transmutable too, the way he would just come across. But he's a person of interest. I want to get your thoughts on Chevy Chase. What do you all think about him, SNL or otherwise?
I think he really broke out once he got into film. I think he really, really broke out with Caddyshack, and then all the National Lampoon's Vacation movies that are beyond hilarious. I think we just didn't get enough of him in SNL. There's not enough. I would say there's not enough substance there, right, to really choose him as the best or one of the best of all time. Just because he was only on one season, I think there's not enough skits or I guess you could use the word evidence of him doing something great on there. So 1 year is just not enough to name him, the GOAT. The best.
Yeah, I agree. We obviously, I was just watching Three Amigos, what was it, yesterday? Yeah, clearly the movie career outweighed the time on SNL. He didn't need the SNL. I mean, he was there. It was great. I mean, it's like Bob said. There's not much to see. I personally don't really. I can't remember any real sketches that were, stood out to me for Chevy Chase. So, I mean, it's great. It was great for his career, no doubt. But as far as SNL cast member, like, he kind of just brushed it aside. He was there, but what did he really do? His movie career was better.
Let me throw a curveball to you guys. Is there anybody any male cast member you felt you're disappointed by? Like when you saw them, you thought, okay, looks funny, a few good skits, but didn't really quite have the career you thought they were going to have. I mentioned Dana Carvey a little bit. I have another example, but is there anybody you were kind of disappointed by?
Are you talking about movie career, like afterwards?
It could be movie career, or it could be like, well, they were good on SNL, but you thought they could be better.
I would say this is probably somebody that you probably haven't thought of in a long time. Jim Brewer was really fucking funny at one time. At one time on SNL, was really, really funny. And then I believe he at one point he quit the show and he stopped doing it. And nothing really panned out after that. David Spade, maybe you could say, he was really funny. And, he was funny in the movies he did with Chris Farley. But after Farley passed away, he was kind of like, I mean, granted, he went into that, he did TV show roles where he was okay and everything like that. But, you would think that he would have maybe exploded and been this big time movie star.
Mine would probably be Tim Meadows. I always thought Tim Meadows did some funny stuff on SNL, and the movie career, you can't say it didn't pan out. I know Ladies Man is a personal favorite of mine as far as movies, and then that character in general. But he nowadays, when you see him in a film, it's usually an Adam Sandler film, and it's usually just a supporting role of a friend or somebody kind of out there character for that movie. So that was him. And I had another one in my head. I'm sorry, I just lost it. But Tim Meadows, yeah, that one kind of, I thought he was really funny, and I thought it could have gotten more.
Having said that, going on the other end of the spectrum, Bill Murray and Dan Aykroyd just exploded afterwards.
Yeah.
I thought that they were really good on SNL, but I mean, they got better and better as they left with all their movies, with all their hits, The Great Outdoors, The Ghostbusters. Bill Murray is fucking amazing. He's hilarious.
He's great.
And I feel like Dan Aykroyd too is really underrated in SNL, as also his movie career.
We'd be remiss if we didn't mention John Belushi too, who was really, the predecessor of the crazy, wild antics and skits. He was great too. One of the people I was a little disappointed by, and I'm not disappointed by him. I think I'm more disappointed by the lack of good material. Chris Rock never really manifested. I remember he went to In Living Color for a while, but he never had anything of note. So I was a little disappointed by Chris Rock not really being the focal point at any point of SNL. Another one I mentioned was because, we had talked about SNL being a launching pad for careers, and people get on SNL to have these great movie careers, TV show careers, except Kenan Thompson, who that's his career is to be on SNL.
He's got a new show. He's got a new show.
They're trying to get rid of him, as I mentioned.
Give him a shot. Give him a shot.
Take a hint. Now we're going to take a turn to our selections and who we thought was the best SNL cast member. So I'm going to go first. I chose, how could you not? I picked Eddie Murphy. I'm going to talk a little bit about why I think Eddie Murphy is the best cast member. I remember growing up, we had Betamax. We didn't have VHS. VHS was a little expensive. We used to go to Top Video, Showtime Video, all the local video marts from our hometown. And I remember the first time, because when you have Betamax, especially when VHS was exploding, the only movies you could rent were like bad horror movies, B movies, Cheech and Chong. And if you went behind the black curtain, you could rent some dirty movies, which
how could you not want to watch Cheech and Chong though, man? Come on.
Those were the new releases. So I remember I ventured off into the VHS section, which had a vast variety of rentals. And I remember seeing a VHS tape of Best of Eddie Murphy Saturday Night Live. And I remember the heartbreak I had because we couldn't rent it because we didn't have a VHS. And I begged my dad, because back then you could actually rent the VCRs. I was like, please rent the VCRs. And when you get them, it looked like a Halliburton case. It looked like this big case that they gave you. And the tracking was always off and the rewinding was very noisy. So it cost a lot of money back then, or at least more than what we had to rent a VHS system. So we went ahead and re-rented it. And the first tape I rented was Best of Eddie Murphy Saturday Night Live. And I remember that was just such a great memory. And just I would watch that thing over and over. I think we even turned it in late. We had to pay late fees, and I'm sure that pissed off my dad because now we had to return the system in late too. But Eddie Murphy was just somebody I just adored, and somebody that I thought who was hilarious. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about Eddie Murphy's trek and journey in Saturday Night Live and why I chose him as my best. In an effort to be considered for the show, Eddie Murphy called SNL talent coordinator Neil Levy every day, explaining how desperately he needed the job. So this guy was hustle. He was 19 years old at the time, and they gave Eddie Murphy a shot as an extra. They said, "Look, kid, we're going to bring you in. You're going to be an extra." His audition went well, but they already had people in mind. Eddie Murphy, he was a cast member in the early 80s. He single-handedly saved SNL from cancellation after Lorne Michaels departed. Yeah, they talked about Joe Piscopo. That season, in season 6, the only two people they brought back the following season was Eddie Murphy and Joe Piscopo. And if you ever hear any Joe Piscopo interviews, he's always talking about like Eddie and me, always sort of comparing him and Eddie Murphy to the Batman and Robin of SNL. I think they were more like the Superman and Jimmy Olsen because Eddie Murphy was on another stratosphere. 19 years old. How many 19-year-olds can you say, or do you know, saved the TV show? I mean, Eddie Murphy did that as a teenager. Remember what you were doing at 19. It wasn't saving TV shows. When Eddie Murphy was on SNL in the early 80s, other cast members often had to go downstairs after shows to catch a cab for him because no cab drivers would stop for him because he was a young black man late at night. So he had all this just stress against him, all this racism, animosity. I think there was some from the cast. He had to fight to get screen time. He wasn't on the first episode, but this didn't shake his confidence. He worked hard. And what SNL wanted to do at that time, there was a cast member by the name of Charles Rocket. And Charles Rocket was supposed to be like the Bill Murray, the Chevy Chase. He's a good looking guy, looked a little bit like Bill Murray, looked a little bit like Chevy Chase. He was so jealous because Eddie stole the spotlight. He had a great deal of animosity toward Eddie because he felt like he was always trying to upstage him. And Charles Rocket was one of those cast members that got cut after season 6 because he just could not compete. And the show was being, carried by Eddie himself. He took the opportunity and ran. He wasn't given the opportunity. He created one. Now, when we get to our selections and we talked about the selections, when we get to your selections, I should say, and we talked about the selections before, everybody had an opportunity. Everybody was brought in from the Groundlings or from Second City or from, wherever, but Eddie Murphy hustled. And not only did he hustle, he was told he was going to be a secondary character. He was told he wasn't going to get skits. He was told that he was going to be a background player. But now you can't mention Saturday Night Live without Eddie Murphy, Mr. Robinson, Gumby, James Brown, and all these skits are outdated. Nobody knows Gumby, who's younger than 25. Nobody knows James Brown. Well, I mean, I shouldn't say nobody, but he just carried the show. Mr. Robinson's Neighborhood. He was the only cast member to ever host when him and Nick Nolte did 48 Hours. Nick Nolte was too sick to host. He's probably fucking hungover or something. But Eddie Murphy hosted the show. I think he was maybe 21 at the time. So he was not only one of the youngest cast members or one of the youngest hosts, but he was the only cast member to host a show. He talked about political theories, social consciousness, racism, everything that people didn't touch at the time because SNL was primarily white. The only black cast member they had before was Garrett Morris, and he didn't really take the reins as Eddie did. And look at his IMDb during his 6-year SNL span: 48 Hours, Trading Places, Beverly Hills Cop, The Golden Child, Beverly Hills Cop 2, Coming to America. Don't forget, he also cut Party All the Time, which is one of the best songs ever. I mean, Eddie was on the top of the world. I mean, he was a musician, he was an actor, he was a comedian, not to mention he did Delirious and Raw at the same time span too, or one of them directly after. I mean, I think it's unassailable. I think in the whole vortex of it, Eddie Murphy not only saved the show, but he was also just one of the most, he was better than the show. You can't talk about too many people who could surpass the SNL brand, but I have no qualms in saying that Eddie Murphy was bigger than SNL. He's had an up and down movie career. We know he had a dip in the 90s and the 2000s, and he's come back recently. He's done a few things recently, and Eddie's not the same Eddie that he was in the 80s. None of us are, right? But Eddie just surpasses everybody. I don't think anybody's close to being in the same level as Eddie Murphy was when he hosted SNL. So before I pass it on, I want you guys to consider a few things. Consider his age. Consider his background, consider that he had all these odds stacked against him, and consider all the pressure he had of the show riding on him, and he did everything. How could you argue that?
Well, man, first off, Eddie Murphy in SNL and his overall career, I mean, he's one of the funniest people alive. One of the ones that you forgot to mention was when he did the white face where he painted black man. He painted himself white and he rode the bus. And the last black man steps off the bus. They have a big party, and he's like saying, he definitely wasn't afraid to point out social injustices and racism in America. And that's one of the things that you could definitely applaud him for. The James Brown skits that he did were just over the top hilarious, especially mumbling, and you don't understand every other damn word he says, right? He was so funny, man. And I think he's an excellent pick. And to your point, it's really hard to argue, but I honestly feel like what your argument is, and when you're looking at Eddie Murphy, you're looking at the big picture, and the big picture is overshadowing just his SNL career. I mean, you said, he was doing movies, another 48 Hours. He was doing Coming to America. He had, he was doing Raw or Delirious, his stand-up comedy hours. Those things made him. And I think those things will way overshadow what he actually did on SNL. But you're trying to carry the same weight with both, because he did it while he was either on SNL or right after SNL. And you're trying to say, well, he was the greatest. And yeah, but a lot of that weight and a lot of that popularity wasn't because of SNL. A lot of that was carried over because he was so fantastic in 48 Hours with Hungover Nick Nolte. He was, Coming to America was a freaking game changer. Beverly Hills Cop. You didn't even mention Beverly Hills Cop. Fucking great movie, hilarious. He had such an amazing career. His stand-up comedy hours are probably the best of all time. Right up there with Richard Pryor and George Carlin and Joseph's favorite Sinbad.
I love Sinbad. Don't ever talk about it.
I know you do. I know you do. That's why I mentioned him. But yeah, that's my big argument. I honestly feel like
he's clean comedy.
I feel like since all these things were going on, either during his SNL career or right after his SNL career, we're kind of like, oh my God, he is such the greatest. But we're looking at the big picture. If you just solely focus in on SNL and you don't look at the big picture of his stand-up career, his movie career, while that was going on, you'll see that he was really great and he was really funny. But is he the best? Top 5, I would say.
But the one counter I have on that is that when we look at Eddie Murphy's stand-up career, very, very popular, but I think what SNL gave him and what he used SNL for, he used SNL as much as SNL used him. Because let's face it, they squeezed Eddie Murphy for everything they could because they needed him, because the show was going to be canceled. I think that what SNL did for Eddie was it gave him a wider audience. As kids, we grew up watching SNL. And of course, at the time, we were watching Delirious when we were 8 years old. So when we saw Eddie Murphy on SNL and said, he's funny, he does buckwheat, he does, these great impressions, he does Muhammad Ali. We were watching Delirious and we were watching Raw because we knew Eddie from SNL. We couldn't have known Eddie from anything else because we were too young to grasp that from anything else. So I think SNL gave him that platform.
And what's funny is I honestly think it's backwards. I think we saw him in Delirious and we saw him in these movies, and that's what made us focus in on like, I might as well check him out on SNL too. I feel like it's backwards, like from the way you see it. What do you think, Joseph?
I think it was just like what Randy said, but in I view it differently. It was a stepping stone, sure, but his career before then, if you look it up, he was doing comedy before. That's what his thing was. I know you mentioned he wanted to be. You talked about him wanting to do SNL, but he wanted to be a comedian first. He did stand up before that, and I think I don't know if we have our numbers wrong. I could have swore I read he was only there for 4 years. So
yes,
I think you said 6.
Yeah, I'm sorry, 4 years.
No, that's cool.
Years, yeah, but I think I said he was on season 6. I don't know, but anyway, 4 years. You're right. Yes.
So I look at it like, nowadays you got these the cast members that get picked up. It's through an improv group. You hear about I think you mentioned the Groundlings earlier. There's a lot of them. UCB. Never mind. Anyway, Eddie was stand up before SNL, and like I think what we've already said, his stand up career was greater than the SNL time. And I know that, like you mentioned, he said, people maybe tuned into him or saw the stand-up specials Raw or and whatnot because of SNL. But if we're talking about great, I know you say, and it's said, and people also, they say that he saved SNL and it might have been canceled. Sure. But how does that make him the best SNL? Okay, just because he got on the show at a time when it was gonna be canceled. A lot of the sketches, and they're funny, no, they're great. I didn't see too much original. A lot of it was impressions, and it was and they're funny. I'm not saying they're not funny. I'm not trying to knock Eddie Murphy at all. I just think that his SNL was really just a stepping stone to what was more of a comedy career, which led to his great comedy movie career in the early 80s. Like you mentioned, he was at this point, he's, taking a dip. He went into the family film stuff. Depending on who you are or your preference, you either liked them or you didn't. Hey, some of them were great, but they were more family oriented. But SNL was just a stepping stone for him. That's how I view. That's why I can't say, I know he's great. I know he did funny things, but I can't put him in this category with people that we've already mentioned, people that we're probably going to talk about, because he was only there for so long. And I know we mentioned with the ladies, with Christian Wiig, you leave when you know it's time. Did he really know it was his time, or did he just, hey, the movies came after the career after he left SNL? He had a great career.
Some of them during 48 Hours, Trading Places. Those were
but nobody could hear Nick Nolte. Nobody understands what that guy's saying.
I wanted to bring back a point from last week. I know when I mentioned Kate McKinnon, one of the arguments against her was like, well, yeah, she's the funniest one on the show, because really the show is it's kind of this, none of the other cast members are really that big, bright, shining star. And you're like, well, maybe that's why she stands out. Well, we can use that same argument against Eddie Murphy now too, because Eddie Murphy and him and Joe Piscopo were really the only ones that stood out in that piss poor cast that they had, especially when he first jumped on. So maybe that's another reason why you think he had a better SNL career than he did, because maybe it was because everybody was so piss poor, and he was a star. I mean, it doesn't matter how bright or shining he was, but he was a star better than everybody else.
Beautiful, bright, shining star.
Yeah, the one thing, and I know you guys are saying, and I hear what you're saying about SNL being a stepping stone, because that was the opener we started off with. But I think Eddie Murphy, when you think about comedy, especially in the 80s, you can't name. If you name the top 20 comedy movies, Eddie Murphy will pop up in about 4 or 5 of them. When you talk about the greatest stand-ups, Eddie Murphy will pop up in the top 5. And when you talk about SNL, I think everything is together. I know it is a stepping stone, but I think you could have that connectivity to being the best this and the best that. And that's what I think made Eddie so special. He was so funny in any avenue he did, whether it be in front of a microphone, talking to people, in front of the camera, or on stage. I mean, he was just a once in a lifetime talent. I think he was just so powerful, charismatic, so comfortable. I think you could transmit Eddie into any decade, and he would outshine everybody. Now, granted, of course, the writers have a lot to do with it, but I think they gave Eddie that levity just because they know that the show hinged on his popularity. But I think with Eddie Murphy and his and what he meant, and I don't want to step into this argument, this particular, but because I do remember Eddie on Saturday Night Live. I think I probably remember him better than you guys, since I'm a little older. But I mean, he was just everywhere, and this was at a time when culture was a collective. Now everything is so sparse with culture. You have pockets of culture everywhere. Everybody's on YouTube, TikTok. But
I hate TikTok.
This was at the time where, not a lot of people had cable. HBO was just barely coming up, and Eddie came up with it. Not everybody had all these avenues to sort of absorb culture. And so Eddie, being the centerpiece of movies, being the centerpiece of comedy, being the centerpiece of SNL, and even having a hit song, he was just a conglomerate. He was so big. He was just so just taking over that it's hard to argue against it. But I'm going to let you guys have that opportunity, because I know I've spoken a lot about Eddie.
Well, let me just say this real quick. That is the argument against him. He was so great. I know him more as comedian Eddie Murphy than anything else. And SNL cast member, sure, I know he was on SNL, but Eddie Murphy to me isn't SNL. He's comedian, comedy, movie star, once in a lifetime, genre defining artist with Party All the Time. But that's the argument against it. I know I know he was on SNL. I just think, and I'm not saying you have to have a long career on SNL to be considered the greatest. You can be there 2 years. If your stuff was tremendous and your stuff was tremendous, you left. But I know him more for comedy other than I do SNL. And that's my argument.
I agree. So if he's not the greatest, if he's not the best, who do you think is, Joseph?
Yes. And before you say that, I have a feeling that both of you guys chose white guys. I'm just saying. All right. Go ahead.
Okay. So I went with Bill Hader, a more recent cast member, not recent. He's been gone for a few years now. I went with Bill Hader because to me, Bill Hader he could do everything. He was a writer. He can do impressions, did characters that you might not. Okay, we're going to get into one later that we know specifically. But Bill Hader did every character that he was given or that he was to portray on SNL. He did it with everything he had. Just quick story into his SNL career. He was a member of, name specifically, but it was part of a comedy improv group, which nowadays, and this was going back to your pick, Randy Murphy, where Murphy came from stand-up comedy. A lot of these cast members nowadays are picked from these improv comedy groups, sketch comedy groups. So Megan Mullally of I hope I said her name right, Will and Grace fame, actually went to one of these sketch comedy shows with her then boyfriend at the time, Nick Offerman.
I think they're still together, right?
Yeah, no, yeah. Well, I mean, like then boyfriend. Now they're married.
Most hilarious power couple, right?
Yes, exactly. So Megan Mullally went to a sketch comedy show with her then boyfriend at the time. What's his name?
Nick Offerman.
Nick Offerman, to see Offerman's brother, who was in the same comedy group as well. To her, she saw Bill Hader and said, "This guy is a bright, shining star." She met him afterwards. But she was going to be hosting SNL at the time soon. And this is at the height of the Will and Grace fame. So Megan Mullally was a big deal. Not to say that she's not right now. But so she met Bill, asked him if he can like give his name to Lorne Michaels. And he was like kind of tripped out about it anyway. But so she did. She gave Lorne Michaels his name. Lorne ended up meeting him for dinner based on what Megan Mullally said. And he was going to leave that night. It was on a Friday night. And he asked him after the dinner, and I don't want to say it was an interview, but after the dinner, he said, "Well, you know what? Why don't you stay for the show? Leave Sunday." And so Bill Hader was tripping out at the time. And he actually, you know what, he decided to stay. And there's actually an episode of SNL where Topher Grace was hosting, and he did a open monologue question thing type, and there's a scene where you see Bill Hader actually standing in the back wearing like a guest VIP thing. This is before he was on the show. So anyway, it was enough based on the word of Megan Mullally. It was enough to get him in front of Lorne Michaels. Lorne Michaels hired him, obviously, and the rest is history. Bill Hader had, to me, some great characters. One of them being obviously, no, I'm not going to get to that one. I'm not there yet. So there was one of Bill Hader's memorable characters to me was Herb Welch. He was this he was this live news reporter covering mostly breaking news, scene stuff, and he'd be there on scene, and he spoke in this deadpan tone, which was hilarious. And most of the time he was just interrupting the person that he was interviewing's recollection of the incident, or cutting them down or hitting them with the microphone while they're trying to talk. He's a very rude character, but he was very funny. His character, his portrayal of the character Devin, I know Bob mentioned the Californias with Fred Armisen. Those two together on this sketch, hilarious. Devin is this surfer repairman who used to be, hey, Devin is tight. I can't do it, but very, very funny. But of course, his character of Stefan, everybody knows Stefan. Stefan is a cultural phenomenon. You can't have an SNL show without and if there's even an inkling that there's going to be an appearance by Stefan, the crowd loses it. So of course, Stefan is the Weekend Update character who gives tourist advice for New York City, usually very bad advice about disturbing places, disturbing club locations with crazy fake celebrities or individuals like a Black George Washington or
one of those orange traffic cones that you
exactly
human bath.
Dan Cortez, just but I mean, Stefan now is synonymous with SNL and that character. The only thing I hate about my selection is I don't hate my selection, but I wish if you go on YouTube, there's a lot of sketches that were either cut for time or dress rehearsal stuff from Bill Hader.
Yeah.
And they're hilarious sketches. And you ask yourself why, that's, I guess, an issue that's you might come back at me with. One in particular, he was a great impressionist too. I'm sorry. He had his Vincent Price impression with the Halloween specials were always hilarious. He does a great Schwarzenegger voice. Obviously he will never do the impression, but he can do this thing. And actually he was a production assistant, if you didn't know, on what was it, Collateral? What's that one with Arnold Schwarzenegger where he's
Jamie Lee Curtis?
Yeah.
He does a dance. Yeah.
True Lies?
No, not True Lies. The one with the Colombian.
About True Lies.
The Colombian. But anyway,
yes.
A lot of the cut for time sketches were very funny. Alan, the man in the box, where he just stands there and dances. The gossipy coal miner, hilarious sketch. Where he just, it's like a Southern coal miner just doing a bunch of gossip. And one with Fred Armisen. I think these two guys work together greatly. I don't know if and actually I don't know if they wrote this sketch together, but of Ronaldo and Alexi, where they're doormen. It was telling Christmas stories to everybody that would come down. It's just hilarious sketch, and unfortunately, this stuff didn't make it to the show. But Bill Hader that Stefan character is. You're always going to remember that. Everybody wants to see it, and unfortunately, he probably can't go anywhere without somebody wanting him to do it.
Yeah. I think definitely. I will say this. I do think Stefan is definitely one of the funniest. I think behind maybe Matt Foley, maybe I put Stefan number 2. Matt Foley by Chris Farley, hilarious. I don't. When you mentioned when you mentioned Bill Hader as your selection, I thought it would be an easy teardown. I was like, well, Bill Hader was good, but I wouldn't put him in the same lore as some of the other selections, some of the honorable mentions we mentioned. But I was watching the skit and I took a deep dive on watching a lot of Bill Hader skits, and he's hilarious. I mean, the guy was commanding. He reminded me a lot of Phil Hartman, which is not a bad thing. But I felt like he was the impressions guy, and they use him as a utility on everything they put him in. So one thing about Bill Hader, other than maybe Stefan, and you mentioned a couple other skits, he was doing some sort of impression. He was very good at it, but I always felt he was kind of that, I don't want to say mid-Carter, but he was a little bit of a level below some of the main event guys that they used a lot. He was nominated for a Primetime Emmy for Outstanding Supporting Actor in a Comedy Series for SNL. He was the first SNL male cast member to receive this nomination since Eddie Murphy. So there's only two of those people who have received that distinction. He was on for 8 years. I always felt like his last 4 years were a lot better than his previous 4. He looked more confident. I know he talked about he suffers from panic attacks. He suffers from nerves. And when he got over that, he soared. The one thing I will say about Bill Hader, he's very macabre. I always thought there were some very dark tones to his skits. And I know Bill Hader was very active in writing his material. And it seems like a lot of the stuff was very dark tone. Maybe that's why you like him so much. It's very dark, very, very menacing and ominous, but in a funny, light way. And maybe that helped them with Barry. I don't know if you guys have caught Barry on HBO. I like that show a lot.
Very funny.
Bill Hader is great on that show. All the characters are great on that show. And I think when I heard that Bill Hader was playing a military veteran who's a hitman, I was like, there's no way this is going to work out. This is going to have to be like silly and obnoxious, but he fits the bill, and he's very entertaining on that show. And I think that dark humor he carried from SNL really has helped him on this show. But I do think he is he's great. I don't see him at a level to where Eddie Murphy is or Dana Carvey or some of these guys. I think Bill Hader, the one thing that has benefited Bill Hader is he's on now where people are noticing he'd be great in this role. He'd be awesome. I never thought he'd be a leading man. I guess Barry has proved that wrong, right? But I always felt like, other than maybe Dana Carvey or whoever, not getting the chances that a lot of these current SNL cast members get, Bill Hader has had that opportunity. I think a lot of it is because we're watching these YouTube clips over and over. We're watching these Stefan clips. They're memes. They're things that we talk about all the time. They're things that we quote. And I think Bill Hader has had the benefit of that. So the fact that him being very quotable, being very likable and funny, I think that's helped him so much. I do think his talents teeter on, dark, ominous, funny, and good impressions. And he's got some great skits too. I don't think he's at a level that you would consider, or at least I would consider him one of the best. I think he's definitely second team if I had to name all SNL cast member all-stars, but he's good. I don't see him as quite in the top 5 for me. What do you think, Bob?
I agree. I mean, Bill Hader is one of the funniest people that's on SNL. One of the funniest. He does a little bit of everything so great. He's got everything, right? He writes, he acts, he laughs, he breaks character all the time. And Stefan, I think he hit that comedy gold with Stefan. Yes. He had that one great character that's iconic character, and I guarantee you it's going to be one of those characters that's going to always stand out. It's going to always be when 10 years down the line, when they do the best SNL characters of all time, I guarantee you that one will be top 5.
I hope they don't make a movie.
But the only bad thing about that is
you wouldn't watch.
Yeah,
no.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I think the one bad thing that we could take away from him, though, is he hit comedy gold with that one character. All his other characters were they were okay. They were funny. I think he's more known for breaking character and making the audience laugh and making his castmates laugh, because he broke character so much. And I think that's great because it's really, really funny. Like he's a really funny, likable, lovable character, lovable actor. He's extremely, extremely funny. Breaking character is just kind of his thing, kind of like Jimmy Fallon, right?
Would you say that it's better for Hader to break? It's more funnier when Hader breaks character, or was it more funnier when Fallon broke character?
I would say it seems like people got Hader, because Hader's all facial expressions,
and it seems like
Jimmy Fallon was trying his best.
Yeah, poor Jimmy Fallon
was staring at the camera.
Yeah,
and trying to bite his lip. But
it was annoying with Jimmy Fallon. Yeah,
I agree.
Although the Barry Gibb talk show is one of the best skits, I will say that. But go ahead.
Well, I will say, I'm sorry. Well, go ahead.
Go ahead, Joseph.
I apologize. Well, no, I was going to say, it's just because I know you talk about the character. I don't see Hader ever getting tired of showing up here and there to do a Stefan character. If you want to talk, if one of Eddie Murphy's characters, Buckwheat, he actually, if you read about it, he retired it ceremoniously on the show.
Yeah, got shot.
Like
because Murphy hated that. He was tired of it. People were going up to him and wanted him to, do Buckwheat do. He got sick of it, so he ended that. I don't think Hader would do that with Stefan. I think he loves to do it because it's the same character, but it's always something new. It's always something fresh. It's always a new joke. It's always some weird club that he's going to be in.
Before I toss it back to you, Bob, I do want to say one thing about Stefan, because I know we were going to talk about Stefan a lot, just because we all love that character. But Stefan's a battery unit. It's two people. I mean, John Mulaney is the guy who writes.
He did co-write it.
Yeah, co-writes it. He throws the ridiculous nightclub scenarios to him, and so that's part of the magic. Is that the reason that Bill Hader's breaking is because there's a lot of unexpected things written on a cue card that are busting him up. But go ahead, Bob.
No, I agree. That I think that's what creates, you said, like that comedy gold, because it's all unexpected. Bill Hader doesn't know what's going to be on that cue card. He doesn't know the specifics of that club, that, you know what I mean? He has to make it his own and keep his shit together and make it funny. You know what I mean? That makes it just a great, great character and a great, great skit.
I will say this, he didn't really have to say too much. And this is, I guess it all depends on your type of humor. And maybe I have a little bit of a dark humor. Maybe that's why I like him, Randy. I don't think he always had to say lines or anything. A lot of sketches that I've seen of him, that I did see of him, were a funny facial expression that just made me laugh.
Yeah,
I know he has
facial. Yeah,
I know he has that a lot, but that to me is hilarious. And if you get a chance to watch the Gossipy Coal Miner one, it was a cut for time. It's hilarious. It's the accent that he chooses, the things that he says, and his facial expressions. I recommend checking that one out if you get a chance.
Bob, what is your take? Who did you select and why?
Well, I feel like we've named a lot of great comedians and a lot of great people who can play all these characters, impersonations, and everything. But I think the one major player that we've left out is Will Ferrell. I think Will Ferrell is the best male cast member of all time. He may be just the best cast member of all time in his own. I mean, his characters, his impersonations, his humor, it dominated SNL from 95 to 2002. Just like Kate McKinnon, I think like every single sketch that he's in, whether it's major, whether it's minor, something's funny is going to happen. You know what I mean? He's going to get all eyes on him. He steals the show. And I feel like you said, like Eddie Murphy saved SNL. I honestly feel like Will Ferrell revived SNL, that franchise, for those years that he was on it. It was kind of on a downswing, and he kind of lifted it up. And he was another, unknown at the time. And I think that makes him stand out. But every weekend people would tune in just to check out SNL for him, to see what he had up his sleeve. He's just a legend on that show. And he's really, really, really hard to top. In SNL, it's just been filled with comedic geniuses, for the past 20, 30, 40 years that it's been on the air. And I think that he steals the spotlight. I think he's the greatest. I think he's the best SNL cast member. If you're looking at that, if we're spotlighting that particular thing, I think he stands out, and I think he's the best. He had a crazy wide variety of characters and sketches. He had the Spartan cheerleaders with Sherry O'Terry, iconic. You know what I mean? Whether you're into cheerleaders, whether you're into that, I mean, that skit was hilarious, and they did it multiple times. He had the Culps with Anna Gasteyer. He did Angry Dad at a barbecue. If you have never seen Angry Dad, it's fucking hilarious because he's there flipping burgers and they just talking all normal, and he's, hey, get off the shed, kids. Get up the pissed off dad at a barbecue. It's funny as hell, man. He did The Lovers in the Jacuzzi, of course.
One of my favorites. Yes,
those just, I mean, they kill me every single time. And then the Happy Birthday Grandma. This is one of the skits you probably don't know too much about. Happy Birthday Grandma. If you haven't seen it, go on YouTube and watch it. He's there sitting with his 3 kids, and they're calling the grandmother on speakerphone to sing her happy birthday, and they start singing. And when they're done, he's like, hold on, Mom, give me a second. And he gets all pissed off at the kids. He's like, y'all can do better than that. She's 85, for God's sake. Sing better. And the kids are all confused and all sad. He just keeps getting more and more pissed off as they sing. It's probably one of his funniest skits and probably not as well known. But he is so great in it, man. His ability to play all these characters and slay all these characters and able to break all the cast members as well as crack up the audience. It's great. I honestly think, I think you may have mentioned it before, I don't think I've ever seen him break character in any stuff that he's done.
It's rare. Yeah.
It's rare, but I have.
Like, he can hold that face or keep it in. Like, man, that guy gets in a character so well.
The fact that he kept it together during Cowbell is a testament.
Yes,
I will say that.
No, that was going to be the next thing I mentioned.
He barely held it together.
And why I love that skit too was the Blue Oyster Cult shooting the Don't Fear the Reaper with Christopher Walken, our legend Christopher Walken, and he's just there pounding on a cowbell. And just his actions, his facial expression, he doesn't really say anything at all in the skit, but he fucking steals the show. He's so hilarious, man.
Jimmy Fallon fucked that one up just for enjoying his life. But, yeah.
He's just an extremely funny individual, and but the greatest thing about him was, honestly, I can think of is his impressions. And his impressions were like just slim to none, man. Harry Carey, oh my God, yeah. Nobody does an impression of Harry Carey like Will fucking Ferrell. As a matter of fact, he did it in his audition. That's the first. Yeah. That was his first impersonation in his audition. If you haven't seen his audition, check it out. Every single skit that he did during his audition later became an actual skit during the show. I think he's probably the only cast member that's ever happened before. Every single character he created became a skit live on the show, was never cut out. So that's something to hang your hat on. He played George W. because George W. Bush. He even had
I give him props
America
for that.
on HBO too.
No, I give him props for that. I found his George Bush impressions very funny.
One of the ones I loved was James Limpton from Inside the Actors.
I was hoping you'd mention that one.
Like that
was my favorite.
So serious and so on point and so correct with his speaking, and it's just like over the top and hilarious. Like I think he really did nail all of his impressions, I feel. But the most impressive one, and the one that I always think of when I think of Will Ferrell, and he's done so many great characters and so many great impressions, and he did so many great things on SNL. But what I think of, and I think is the most impressive and funniest, is his impression of the late Alex Trebek and Celebrity Jeopardy.
Yeah,
he knows every single one of those skits has me dying on the floor every single time. It's just the way he plays Alex Trebek. First off, it's so ultra serious, and he's always got that irritated look on his face because the celebrity contestants on the show is just so fucking funny, and it kind of goes away because Will Ferrell's always like he plays like the crazier one, the louder one, and on that skit he allows everybody else to be crazy and stupid and idiotic and say all these wildish things, and he has to like keep it together and be composed, and he's usually just with a small mouth, looking pissed off and hating, Burt Reynolds.
Norm Macdonald's. Burt Reynolds is great.
I mean, it's so funny. That whole skit is just so well written and so well worked. I mean, from the stupid categories like, states that end in Hampshire, and then like the celebrities purposely misreading them, like instead of saying therapists, they say the rapist for 500, right? The whole skit.
That's Sean Connery.
Or was it anal bum cover, right? Instead of album cover, right? So just the whole skit, everything about it, the way he acts, the way that he interacts with the celebrities on the show, it's just so perfect and so iconic, and nothing is better than his those back and forth, his interactions with Sean Connery's character. And in those, they're always they're like the odd couple that just hated each other, but they work so well together. They're so polar opposites, and it always ended with Sean Connery, of course, taking a stab at Alex Trebek's mother, right? One of them for sure, he's like, Connery, you don't have negative 69 points. That's not your score. And he said, yeah, well, that's how I scored with your mother last night, Trebek. So I mean, just dying. There's always a shot. Those skits, honestly, like I said, Will Ferrell is just has so many great sketches and so many great skits and so many memorable characters. But those celebrity Jeopardies are just so perfect, so well written, so great. And I think he's going to stand out just like his Stefan character. I think he has multiple Stefan characters, right? I don't think that there's anybody who's ever done it better. In his 7-year run, he was there for 7 years, which I feel is a perfect amount of time. And then he went on to do some really good movies and really funny movies. And, I don't feel like it's the movie career that made him. I feel like it's his SNL career that made him into that superstar, that celebrity, to get that celebrity status. What do y'all think?
I think just a few more Will Ferrell facts. He was the highest paid cast member ever at $350,000. Most SNL, they make I think $100,000 a year, and they wanted to keep Will Ferrell just because. Hey, let's keep this going. We're transitioning at the time, and he stayed for another season. I will say this: the reason I hate Will Ferrell is because my first car was a Dodge Stratus. So I always got the joke. I think you guys remember that skit with Sarah Michelle Gellar where they were having a dinner and it would get disrupted and they would get into an argument. He would say something ridiculous at the end that he was improvising, and he had that Dodge Stratus line. So I hate it when people say, "Oh, you got a Dodge Stratus," just like that Will Ferrell skit. So that was always kind of tough to roll with it. I miss that car, but you're right, Bob. After a disastrous 1994-95 SNL season where they lost Sandler, they lost Farley, they lost Mike Myers, and I remember that year because that was my senior year of high school. They brought in a whole new cast. It was kind of in the same sort of legend that the Eddie Murphy thing took place. They brought in a whole bunch of new cast members, and they kept a few. These are the cast members they brought in at the time: Chris Kattan, Daryl Hammond, Jim Brewer, and Will Ferrell. Now, after that first season, if you would have told me who was going to be the stars of that SNL cast, I would have told you in this order. I would have said it was going to be Jim Brewer, it was going to be Chris Kattan, it was going to be Daryl Hammond, and it was going to be Will Ferrell fourth. Because I didn't think Will Ferrell was that funny that first season. I remember watching him and thinking he was okay. but he grew into a powerhouse. And you're right. After that first season, those next 6 seasons, he was just tremendous. He was the show. He left because, as he quoted, I didn't want to become known as the guy who graduated from high school but still hangs out in his van in the parking lot picking up the seniors. So even in his exit, he was funny. I think Will Ferrell was brilliant. I call him controlled absurd, where he is completely outlandish. He's irreverent, but his character maintains a quiet composure, sometimes loud, and that's when he was at his best. When he was loud and aware, I didn't find him as funny when he was loud. When he was, coming in with the red, white, and blue short shorts, or when he was the homeless vagabond off the streets that was in the art studio and they had to draw him naked, and he would say absurd things like, he'd get an erection and people would get grossed out, and he would say the mighty Kong has awoken, or he would say things like that. I mean,
so you preferred more the sensitive sergeant.
Yeah, the sensitive sergeant. But he was funny. I will say this: it's a hard argue because I think Will Ferrell is brilliant. He's definitely in my top 5. I think he's, in terms of success, I would put him right behind Eddie Murphy, because when you see Will Ferrell's IMDb and all the movies he's done and all the comedies, he's tremendous. I did think his act grew a little old just because, the impressions are great, but you always knew Will Ferrell was going to do something that was just absurd. It was not so much he didn't do social commentary, or he didn't really talk about the zeitgeist of what was going on. Will Ferrell was the kind of guy that you could just shut off your brain and just watch him, and he was just brilliantly hilarious in the sort of the context of just the absurd, whereas I thought Eddie was more of a thinking man's comedian. That's just a preference. It doesn't make Eddie it's just a difference there. I also think that Will Ferrell had the benefit of 2 things, and of course, this is probably a very thinly veiled argument because it's not his fault. He started off in the infancy of the internet. So as Will Ferrell, as the internet grew bigger and bigger, Will Ferrell was becoming a YouTube sensation. He was becoming a meme. He was becoming shirts. He was becoming all this stuff that the internet provided him that Eddie and some of the other guys didn't have the opportunity to have. He had a consistent cast during most of his stint. So it's like a basketball team who resigns everybody. They build cohesion, and I think that support made Ferrell better. Will Ferrell better. I'm sorry. I'm not saying that that's a knock, but Eddie was, losing cast members constantly, and Will Ferrell had that constant cast. He had Chris Parnell, he had Daryl Hammond, he had Chris Kattan, he had all these people, Anna Gasteyer and Rachel Dratch. He had a good stretch where most of his tenure at SNL were the same cast members. So, like I said, not his fault, not a knock on him. I just think he didn't have the challenges Eddie had to overcome, and that's my argument.
I think you hit on a few good points, but again, you said like Eddie Murphy was the thinking man's right comedy, but Will Ferrell provided a little vast variety of different comedy styles. Like I said, he could be crazy, he could be loud, he could be quiet, he could be subdued, he could give you facial expressions. He can't say shit he wouldn't say shit in a skit and still be the funniest guy. And I do think you're a little bit wrong on your timetable. YouTube he left SNL in 2002, and I don't remember in 2002 being YouTube being a huge thing. But the internet really didn't take off like AOL until like 99. So maybe he did get the benefit of the doubt of maybe like 2 years of the internet, but that was before memes, and it was more like chat rooms and age, sex, location, and all that kind of crap. But I do see your point. Well, what do you think, Joseph? What's your argument?
Randy touched up on a lot of what I was going to say, and so I don't want to beat it over repeat what he says, but I it's like he mentioned, I at some point I got tired of his the outlandishness of the characters, the screaming, you want to look like you want to say something. Go ahead, Bob.
No. I was going to agree with you, but I think that more came with the characters that he did in movies. Not so much the characters that he did on SNL. I know Old School was funny, and then Step Brothers was funny.
Keep our composure.
It was like the same goddamn character over and over and over again in his movies. So I agree with you 1,000%. In his movies, it did get kind of tiresome of hearing him play the same stupid character.
And that's true. He had great. I don't want to say characters. He played great characters. I don't know if he specifically wrote any of them. And I'm not going to say yes or no. So I'm not going to say he did or he didn't. But the characters that he did play in each skit, I found them funny. I found his impressions funnier than the original characters. Like I mentioned earlier, I loved his George Bush impression. I thought it was like the dumb George Bush, and I'm not talking crap about George Bush. This isn't that type of podcast. So the portrayal from Will Ferrell as George Bush was hilarious. I mean, his and the SNL career was the springboard to his movie career, but and actually he didn't. A lot of his first movies were just small parts or second, third tier characters. It wasn't really until Anchorman that he was the main lead character of the movie, and even then that was an ensemble cast. I got tired of the yelling, I guess. Like that was my thing. The outlandish, like what Randy says. I thought it got a little repetitive, but that was what worked back then. It did. I'm not, it was a different time. It was great. It was a new time, and to what Randy said, with Farrell coming in with a bunch of new people. SNL didn't. They lost those characters, but that was because they fired them. So that was their fault. But can you imagine like a Farley and an Adam Sandler doing stuff with Will Ferrell?
I think Will Ferrell was there when Farley hosted, and I don't know if he was. Yeah, Farley's last time hosted, I think he did. I don't think they worked off each other though, so that would have been great to see. And Farley was so far gone. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, I know, poor guy. And I agree with y'all's points. And honestly, I can personally say that was like, it's annoying. It's the same character, and I just can't watch it anymore. But those were the movies. Never in SNL did I feel like, oh, he was doing the same thing. I mean, his character in the Culp's completely different than the character in the Spartan Cheerleaders. Harry Carey in space, completely different kind of fucking funny. You know what I mean? So subdued and so quiet, playing Alex Trebek. You know what I mean? Like, he did a lot of different characters, and I feel like kind of the opposite of what Randy was saying. I feel like when you look at Will Ferrell just in SNL, he was the greatest. And then his movie career was pretty good, and he had some great comedies, and they all got kind of annoying afterwards. But just solely looking at SNL, I mean, he nobody did it better than him.
But and what I'm saying to you is actually in a positive, I guess, into what Randy said and what he said himself. When he left, he knew when to leave. I think it got to the point when I can't keep doing these things. If I'm gonna run these into the ground if I keep doing them. And he left
at the right time.
And I think he wanted to leave after 5 years. I think they brought him back 1 year. He signed a 1-year deal and said, okay, I'm done. And then they sweetened the pot and said, we're paying you. You're going to be the highest paid cast member ever. How could you turn that down? And as your farewell, why not go out on top as the highest paid and somebody that's going to be celebrated, and it's going to be your last year, and you get to do whatever you want. And I think that's what Will Ferrell was when he was at his best, is when he was sort of untethered, and he would be so ridiculous, and he could dress up and show his muffin top and his hairy legs and everything, and people always got a kick out of that. No doubt he was funny. I think that all three of the people we mentioned were all timers, first teamers. And that is a tough list to make, because when we're talking about Farley, I really wanted to go with Chris Farley, but I think a lot of Chris Farley's the detriment to his career was his drug use, and I didn't want to touch upon. I know a lot of these guys, they had their downfalls with hard drugs and alcohol. Belushi was another guy who was brilliant. And drugs brought him down too. I don't want to end the show on a bad tone, but when you think about what could have been, and because they were doing this stuff while they were on the show. I mean, it's well noted. Go ahead, Joseph.
Also the unfortunate circumstances of Phil Hartman.
Phil Hartman. Yeah, good point. That's another good point. Very tragic end to his life. And this stuff was going on during the show. I mean, alcoholism, rampant cocaine use, especially in the 80s and the 90s. And who knows what could have been. And we could be spinning this a whole lot differently. We could be saying Chris Farley had the best career, and he was had the best movie career, best overall career. And I know it's not about that. It's about who was funnier there. And I just wanted to take a moment to recognize his accomplishments and what he brought to the table. And I really wish we could have talked a lot about him. I really wish we could have talked about him more, because I think he cracks us up like no other. But I understand why none of us went with him, because of the demise and because of the inconsistencies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, maybe it could be something we bring up in a future topic or something like that.
Mm-hmm. But that's I think everybody brought up a good point, and we'd like to hear from everybody out there. We went from a somber note. Let's pick it up a little bit. People out there listening to us, please hit us up, formidableopponents@gmail.com, or reach out to us on Twitter, @fopponents, I should say. We really would love to hear from you. Our next topic we will be covering on episode 7, best movie action hero. Did I say that right? I guess I did. Yes, we are going with best action movie hero.
Best action hero.
Best action hero in the movies. We're gonna have a lot of fun with that. There's gonna be a lot of throwbacks. So if you're into the when action movies were action movies, I think this will be the show for you. But we'd love to hear from you. And we're very thankful that you guys are listening. We see that the numbers are going up. We see that people are reaching out to us, and we can't wait to talk to you all more extensively. So for Bob and Joseph, this is Randall, and we'll see you guys next week. Thank y'all.